can observe our democratic meetings. Please therefore remember that this meeting could be watched anywhere at any time by anyone with access to the internet. There are subtitles available via the YouTube broadcast. These are generated by YouTube. The Council is not responsible for these subtitles or their accuracy. There is a delay between the meeting and the broadcast of about 30 seconds. Webcast officer, please can you confirm the broadcast is running?
Hi Jess, it's now running.
Thank you. Good morning and welcome to today's licensing hearing on Tuesday, 21st of July 2020. Before we commence with the proceedings, I can confirm that the Council has adopted some basic etiquette rules for its remote meetings. For ease, these are as follows. Only speak when the Chairman invites you to do so. Members, please let the Chairman know when you want to speak through the chat function. The Chairman will introduce speakers in the order that the request to speak was made, unless there is a point of order which will be prioritised. Please minimise all distractions while you are in the meeting. Please mute your microphone when not speaking and consider turning your video off too to reduce interference on the audio feed. Please bear in mind that there may be a lag between speaking and other attendees hearing you, so please bear this in mind. Reports and supporting evidence has been made available to you in advance of the meeting. When referring to a report, please quote the page and paragraph number. If you lose connection at any point and are unable to immediately rejoin, then please call the meeting facilitator. Contact details have been provided. Please only use the chat function for the purpose prescribed for requesting to speak or for a point of order. The chat function is subject to the Access to Information Regimes (FOI/EIR) and is also subject to data protection, rules of defamation and the Council's Code of Conduct. I can confirm that the meeting is quorate and may proceed. I will now hand over to the Chairman, Councillor John Ball.
Thank you, Nicola. Or Jess. Okay, well, I shall stick strictly to the script which we have prepared for this morning. And start by saying good morning. My name is Councillor John Ball and I'm the Chairman for this Council's first licensing hearing held as a virtual meeting. I would ask everyone to be patient and understanding as we feel our way through this new way of working. This hearing will be held in accordance with the procedure which was published with the agenda. However, as we're holding this meeting as a virtual meeting, I would like to outline the process before asking the members of the subcommittee and parties to the hearing to introduce themselves. The hearing will be conducted as follows. The hearing will commence with the members of the subcommittee introducing themselves. I will then invite the licence holder to introduce themselves, followed by the interested parties and officers. Before commencing to the hearing, I will attend to any requests for the submission of any additional information. The hearing will commence with the licensing officer outlining the application we are here to determine. I will then invite the applicant, the licence holder, to set out their application and to address any points which they wish to make in response to points made in the representation about the meeting. In respect to points made in the representation about the application, the interested parties will then be invited to ask questions of the applicants. This will then be followed by questions by members. I will then invite the interested parties to set out their representation. The interested parties may only amplify their representation and not introduce new matters which are not referred to in their letter of representation. The applicant will be invited to ask questions of the interested parties, and this will be followed by questions by members. Please can I advise all parties to this hearing that questions are permitted, but not cross-examination. I'll just detail what we mean by cross-examination. People sometimes misunderstand. Cross-examination is where there are repeated questions of an almost identical nature, but a slightly different form. You can pursue different points, but not the same point. The hearing will then move to closing statements. During closing statements, no new matters may be introduced. Parties may wish to summarise points they wish to make, including commenting on responses received to questions. The interested parties will then be invited to make their closing statements first, followed by the applicant. I will then ask the legal advisor whether there are any matters which need to be addressed before the hearing is adjourned for deliberation in private in accordance with the provisions of the Licensing Act 2003 Hearings Regulations 2005. At this point, I shall ask all parties, apart from subcommittee members, the legal advisor and the governance administrator, to disconnect from the meeting, and live streaming of the meeting will end. During the period from the end of the first part of the hearing to the subcommittee announcing the decision, there will be no contact with the parties to the hearing, and parties cannot submit additional information. The hearing will be adjourned to Friday the 24th of July 2020, when the decision will be announced together with the reasons for the decision. All parties to this hearing are invited to attend the hearing on Friday to hear the decision. I'll now proceed to introductions. As mentioned at the beginning, I'm Councillor John Ball, and I shall be chairing this meeting. The subcommittee consists of Councillor Andrew Hensman, Bill Rose, and Peter Schweer. The subcommittee for this hearing consists of 3 members, with 1 as a reserve. Councillor Rose is the reserve member who will only participate should there be a conflict of interests. Following the declarations of interest, Councillor Rose will only participate as an observer. Can I please ask the members to introduce themselves?
Hello.
Sorry, it's Councillor Hensman, Councillor Rose, Councillor Swear. Could you please introduce yourselves, please? Could I ask Councillor Hensman to start? Councillor Hensman, sorry, your microphone is switched off. Can you switch it on, please?
Sorry about that. Good morning, everybody. My name is Councillor Andrew Hensman, and I'm the ward member for Braintree Central and Beckers Green.
Thank you, Councillor Hensman. Councillor Rose, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, good morning, everybody. Councillor Bill Rose. I will probably be an observer and reserve for today's panel hearing. Thank you.
Councillor Swear, could you please introduce yourself?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Councillor Peter Schweer.
Thank you, members. Chairman, I now hand back to you to invite the applicant, Mrs. Irwin, to introduce herself.
Hello, my name is Catherine Irwin. I am the owner and the landlady at the Fox and Hounds pub in Steeple Bumpstead.
Thank you. And on behalf of the chairman, could I invite the interested party, Mr. Alex Lexton, to introduce himself, please?
To do that first. Good morning, my name is Alex Laxton. I live directly next door to the Fox and Hounds.
Thank you very much, Mr. Laxton, Mrs. Irwin, and members. I now hand back to the chairman to continue with the script. Thank you.
I'm also joined by Nicola Evans, the licensing officer, and Emma Wisby, and also legal advisor. Also Daniel Malini, who is the licensing manager. We're also joined by Jessica Mann, and this hearing is also supported by a meeting facilitator, Jessica Mann, and the governance officer, Alison Webb, who will be taking the minutes for the meeting. I'll now proceed to apologies for absence. Are there any apologies for absence?
Chairman, all members of the subcommittee are present, therefore you may commence the next item of business. Thank you.
I'll ask if any members have any declarations of interests that they may have in the proceedings. I have none myself.
I have none, Chairman.
I have none, Chairman.
I have none, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As I wish, just address this to Councillor Bill Rose. As you wish to remain and observe, please can I remind you that you cannot participate in or determine the application. And can I ask confirmation that all members have read the reports?
Thank you, Chairman. I understand that. Thank you.
Yes. Councillor Hensman, have you read the report?
Yes, Chairman, I've got it here with me and I have read it.
Yes. Councillor Schwier?
Yes, Chair, I can confirm that I not only have the report, but I have read it in detail. Thank you.
Thank you. Same goes for myself. Please can the applicant, Catherine Irwin, confirm that you have received and read the report?
Yes, I have received the report and read it in detail. Thank you.
Thank you. And please could Alex Laxton, the interested party, confirm that you've received and read the report?
Yes, thank you. I have read and received and read it. Yes.
Good. Okay. I must say that if a party to this hearing wishes to submit any information which has not been previously submitted, it may only be submitted with the permission of all the parties to the hearing. Please can I ask Catherine Irwin if there is any further information that she wishes to submit?
No, there isn't.
No. Okay. And yes, that's no. And can I ask the same question of Alex Laxton? Is there any information that he wishes to submit?
No, no additional information.
Thank you very much. Please can I invite the licensing officer, Nicola Evans, to outline the application before us today.
Thank you, Chairman. Members are requested to consider an application for a variation to a premises licence, which has been submitted by applicant Catherine Irwin relating to the Fox and Hounds, 3 Chapel Street, Steeple, Bumpstead. The applicant transferred the licence into her name on the 23rd of September 2019, and she's also the designated premises supervisor. The purpose of the variation is to remove condition 10 from the licence, which requires the public front garden to be cleared of patrons or other persons, with the exception of allowing access and egress from 8:30 p.m. daily. The applicant has proposed restrictions to support the application. During the 28-day consultation period, the licensing authority received one representation from an interested party, which is presented in your report as Appendix 3 and 4. Members are advised that they have the following options when determining this application. Grant the application to vary the premises licence with conditions as described within the operating schedule to the premises licence application. To grant the application to vary the premises licence with additional conditions deemed necessary to promote the 4 licensing objectives. To grant the application to vary the premises licence with amended activities or times, or to refuse the application to vary the premises licence. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Please can I invite the applicant, Catherine Irwin, to present her application.
Hello, everybody again. So I decided to make this application to vary the premises licence, mainly because of the horrific time that we've all experienced recently with the COVID-19 and the pub being forced to shut as per government instruction. It was quite a stressful time, obviously, not knowing what was going to happen when we were allowed to open again. I did take advantage, which I do have on the licence, for the takeaways for food. So I carried on trading and providing a service to the village, which was very much appreciated by the locals. looking forward to all the time to open again, and when the time was that we were allowed to open. Once I had notification that this was going to happen and we were allowed to open again, I thought, well, I need as much space as possible, because of the guidelines at the time was a 2 metre social distancing. It's now one plus rather, and I have, because of the restriction on the front garden, I need as much space as possible, for as long as possible, making it fair for everybody, not just me, the customers, but also everybody that lives near the pub. So I thought about it, and for all I'm requesting is for 4 months of the year, up to an hour before closing, to allow people to enjoy food, to enjoy a drink and their social time together, which they've been deprived of for the last 4 months, on the front garden as well as the rear garden, because it's only a small areas that I have. So for the months of May, June, July, August, up till Monday and a Thursday and a Sunday up to 10 o'clock at night, and then a Friday and Saturday up to 11 o'clock at night, to allow people to just enjoy, drink, eat at the front. And then after this time, then the people would be asked to come inside or go out to the rear garden. So, and that's it really in a nutshell, just to ease the times that I'm going through at the moment, not just me, but everybody is in the hospitality business. It's extremely difficult, and it's been very stressful putting the guidelines together for the social distancing. And here at the Fox and Hounds, I have gone above and beyond what was required, and I'm also temperature checking people as they arrive, as well as the track and trace. Because I have to make everybody safe, including the staff, and try and my best to, to run my business at the same time as going through this period and keeping everybody safe. And that's really it.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Irwin. Mr. Laxton, do you have any questions, Mrs. Irwin? Please can I remind you that this is questions only. You will be invited to give your representation later in the hearing.
No, Chairman, no questions.
Chairman,
Right.
if I just may, Mr. Laxton, this is your only opportunity to ask questions of the applicant. Are you happy that you do not wish to ask questions of Mrs. Irwin through this hearing procedure, or would you like a few moments just to think about any questions you might have for her?
No questions. My own presentation is quite thorough, so I think it will cover anything that I could possibly say.
Thank you very much for that clarification, Mr. Laxton. I'm grateful. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Laxton. I'll now ask members if they have any questions for the applicant. As they appear on my screen, Councillor Schroyer, do you have any questions?
Not at the moment, thank you, Chair.
Right. Councillor Hensman, do you have any questions?
Not at the moment, thank you, Chair.
I have a question, a fairly broad question, I suppose, of Mrs. Irwin. Since you've had the pub up and running for the short period between September and March, what kind of numbers have you had through the door generally at weekends?
Well, it all varies. And before the COVID, I would say I've never had anybody that doesn't have a seat, if I can sort of put it that way. Inside the actually the main bar area, I'm able to seat possibly 20 people at tables. At the time, obviously, we did have bar stools, so people were able to sit at the bar. So I would say a maximum of 25 at any one time, which isn't very often, because people come and go. So Friday night is always the busiest evening when I was open prior to the COVID. And I would say possibly a maximum of 15 to 20 would have been the maximum at any one time on a Friday, which is always the busiest time. I also have the snug bar, which is for dining only. So I don't have drinkers in there. So if we don't have any people eating or book tables, I don't encourage the customers to use that bar. So I can cram more people in, because that's not the idea that I have. So I've also taken away one of the rooms, which was a dining room. And I now have that is a games room, so people can play pool if they wish in the back of the property. So that encourages even less people to be seated in the pub. So I would say on a weekend, maximum would be 20 to 25. And the only time that I've ever had a lot of people in the bar in all three rooms was on New Year's Eve. And I would say there was possibly 50 people maximum.
Does that include the outside space, or?
Pardon, sorry?
Does that include the outside space?
The outside space I have, in the time that we're talking about, it was winter time, so people weren't really keen to sit outside. But I have now positioned, because I bought some new furniture and that sort of thing. I've positioned the furniture 1 meter apart, but that's how the furniture will stay in the future anyway, because people need their own bit of space. And out there, I can actually seat. I have 3 tables of 4, so there's 12 out in the back, and a maximum out the front. I have 2, 4, 7, and 6, 13 as a maximum in the front. That's if every single table is sat at.
Thank you very much. Can we, Councillor Hensman, would you like to speak now? If you unmute.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I've just thought of one question for Mrs. Irwin, if I may, and that is, I noticed your personal licence was issued by the London Borough of Havering, so therefore you must have experience of running and managing premises prior to taking over the pub in Steeple Bunsted, and just wondered if you'd be able to give me some details, please.
Yes, of course, with pleasure. I lived in Hornchurch before I moved to Steeple Bunsted, and that's where I applied to that council, because that's where I lived at the time. But from 2014 to 2017, a period of 3 years, I owned a bar in Mallorca, which was a very, very busy bar on the party island. Very noisy, very busy, lots of people, and that was my experience for 3 years. And it was an English-run bar, and I used to do food and have plenty of people in there, a pool table, and it was great fun, actually. But that's what I did before. On occasion, I did have to have crowd control in place there. In other words, because there were so many people, I had to have somebody on the door to limit the amount of people coming in and making sure everything was to order. And the Guardia Civil, the people above the police, are very hot on bars not being overcrowded and that sort of thing. And I never had to have any dealings with the Guardia Civil at all. So it was a very family orientated pub in the day, with people on holiday with their families coming in for English breakfast and that sort of thing. And in the evening, it was just, we used to have pool matches and the music would be on because I had a music license, and nothing like a nightclub, of course, but it was just a friendly little village, and I owned a pub, the English pub on the strip.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Councillor Shrian, do you have any questions at this point, or?
No, I think the only question I was going to ask is being covered by Councillor Andrew Headsman. Thank you. Okay,
thank you very much. Please can I now ask Mr. Laxton to present his representation on the application? Can I just remind you that you may only amplify your application, your representation.
Firstly, Bush, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak at this hearing. I'm not a natural objector and avoid political issues. This is only the second time I've objected publicly to anything, and both times have related to exactly the same issue at the same premises. The most fundamental point about this application by the Fox and Hounds is that nothing has changed in relation to the respective properties or their use. This seemingly harmless amendment relates to a condition that was considered carefully in 2010 and has kept the peace for the last decade. The relationship between ourselves and subsequent licensees has been harmonious and no disputes have occurred, which accords with Braintree's records within the agenda for this hearing. As a consequence, the application in June came as a complete shock, in the hope that the applicant may have been unaware of the history of the premises or the enormous emphasis that we place on this one condition. I called Mrs. Irwin. I had hoped that the application could either be withdrawn or modified prior to any formal objection, or otherwise that some attempt would have been made to mediate prior to the end of the consultation process. Neither has happened, which is why I regret that this matter is now before you. I will try to remain dispassionate and professional, but I must emphasise this matter relates to my home, in a conservation area of a small village, where we're well known as a family. My children are growing up here, and my wife is a teacher in the village school. Like most people, we wish to avoid controversy and dispute, especially where unkind or unjustified comments can spread via word of mouth or social media. I won't go through the history of the site and the previous dispute, which has already been referred to in the agenda. My letter of objection in June 2010 was written during a desperate time when we had incessant issues with both the creation of this front garden area and also weekly live music events. For the record, it was the subsequent music events that gave rise to the last complaints registered by Braintree, which ceased when the premises passed the next licensees, Rob and Rani. I would, however, be grateful to highlight some of the salient points that relate to this application and to the use of this garden. Prior to moving to the village, we lived for a number of years next to the Red Lion in Sturma with no issues whatsoever. Due to the impending arrival of our twins, we needed a larger house in something of a hurry. And this house, the old bakery house, situated in the middle of this village with all its amenities, was perfect. We noted the Fox and Hounds as a Grade 2 listed pub in the centre of a conservation area. It had a bench outside, which is still shown incidentally on the current licence plan. We sold cream teas and meals. I visited the pub several times before we purchased the house to check that it was quiet and peaceful. We arrived in May 2008, there were no issues at all, and we were able to enjoy our new home. As I stated in my previous objection, we expected the odd over loud greeting or merriment, but not the distressing situation that developed. When the licensee, Asher, moved away, I don't know his surname, I'm sorry, moved away, I think that was in early 2009, his mother, Jackie, took over. I believe that she and her partner, who was a musician, were quite controversial, and there were a number of arguments and fights at this time. I recall an occasion when his tyres were slashed outside of our house. We had the police attend to inquire whether we'd seen or knew anything, which was rather unpleasant for us, for our children. Jackie owned a number of small dogs, and in approximately September 2009, she closed the rear garden to give them an exercise area. As a consequence, she erected a fence around the area directly outside of my dining room window and moved all the furniture, including large parasols, to the front. I had a formal meeting with her to express my concerns about the deliberate concentration of customers outside of our windows, whereupon I was told she owned the area and could more or less do what she wanted with it. She was fully aware that I was extremely concerned about drinkers right outside of our windows, but she made no effort to ameliorate the situation. The next 2 months in late 2009 were truly appalling. This is September and October. With no exaggeration, we had people shouting, swearing, smoking outside of our windows most evenings, and until past midnight several times a week. Noise became appreciably louder after 9 o'clock, with a change in the type and behaviour of customers. The random, unpredictable nature of the noise had a profound effect on our family life. The children's sleep was badly disturbed, and my wife and I became increasingly agitated and anxious. We considered moving, but concluded that no one in their right mind would ever buy our house. The cold weather helped the situation, with external seating until March 2010, which was warm, rather like this year, and which brought the drinkers back. A particular group used to gather, and Jackie would often close up the pub at approximately midnight and leave them to it with a good supply of drinks. I recall a night when I heard cheering, clapping, loud laughter at about 1:30 and got up to investigate. 3 men were cheering as a woman urinated in one of the plant pots. By this time, the babies were crying, so they had to be attended to, and I can tell from first-hand witness that the group didn't leave until after 2 o'clock. Eventually, I called Braintree Licensing and spoke to Vicky Gorham, who is still with you. I told her what was happening, including the weekly live music events, and inquired what the licence actually permitted the pub to do. She was sympathetic and helpful and asked me a number of questions to clarify, but I certainly did not foresee the pub closing down almost immediately. I had been unaware that Asher was the licensee and that the pub had not been transferred, the licence had not been transferred when Jackie took over. With reference to that objection letter in June 2010, I made it clear that I had no objection to the normal operation of the Fox and Hounds. I literally wanted to set the clock back 8 months and return to the situation that had been acceptable prior to September 2009. We were told at the time that the Fox and Hounds owned this garden area in question, but neither Braintree or I sought to challenge the development on planning or conservation area grounds. This was perhaps an oversight in retrospect, as the area continues to develop and change each year, but our primary concern related to the noise and amenity relating to the new use. Returning to the present of this garden, the photos appended demonstrate that it did not exist prior to September 2009. It's difficult to date the black and white photo, but the vehicle appears to be 1930s. There are many more photos on the internet from the 1980s until 2009, including aerial photographs from Google Maps. I find the black and white photo quite interesting personally, as it shows the former old bakery house that existed from approximately 1930 until 2001. It can also be seen in the aerial photo from about 2000. My current house was built on the same plot in much the same style, so it can only be assumed that the proximity of these two properties was considered carefully when planning permission and conservation area consent was granted in 2001, but I restate there was no garden area at the time, and the pub closed shortly afterwards for renovation. I work from home a great deal, and did prior to COVID-19, and I use my dining room as an office. Normally I sit facing the window looking towards the 14th century moot hall, but today I have my back to it. If I just move the computer, excuse me a minute, you can see quite clearly the proximity of what I'm talking about. There. It can easily be, right, how intrusive this could be. Without being remotely nosy, I'm aware of the type and time of usage quite accurately, which I will return to later. Returning to 2010, there was a number of meetings and discussions with both Mrs. Gorham and Mr. Chris Shipham in the Environmental Health Department. At that time, Mr. Shipham gave me some critical advice. He said, "It is not possible for a licensee or anyone else to control what people say or how loudly they speak or laugh. Therefore, the only legal and enforceable way to control the noise emanating from an area is to control the time that the area can be used." He recommended closure at 7:30 on the basis that people have not got too settled at that point of the evening, have not had too much to drink, and there was a greater probability that alternative seating would be available. Further to these conversations, it was he, or the Environmental Health Department, who wrote the conditions, stipulating the closure of this garden area at 7:30, plus other conditions to control noise and disturbance during music events. Further to these conditions, I withdrew my objection to the granting of a new premises licence. I was contacted by Jackie's representative, who sought a later time, and we compromised at 8:30, which was reasonable in relation to the bedtime of my children. At this point, I wish to compliment Braintree County District Council. These carefully considered conditions have kept the peace and avoided any dispute for the past decade. They work because they're simple and appropriate for the properties in this location. It's noted in the report to this hearing there were a number of complaints escalated to Braintree during 2010 and 11, but these related to music events where the noise levels were excessive. I have on file an email from Mr. Shipham, dated 31st of August 2011, which recognises that the music was audible, especially when the front door was open, but also, and I quote, that persons using the front beer garden were also noisy, which I can appreciate would likely cause disturbance in the front rooms of your property. He went on to say that licensing will liaise with the Fox and Hounds to ensure that the licensing conditions are observed, in particular regarding the closure of the front beer garden and the signage of it. This clearly worked, no further action required, and the premises were let to Rob and Rani, who operated the pub quite sensibly and professionally for the next 6 or 7 years until Asher returned. It must also be mentioned at this stage that Rob and Rani reinstated the rear courtyard garden, as Mrs. Owen has already said, which replaced all the pub's external seating lost in 2009. This rear courtyard is entirely enclosed by buildings, with the nearest property being the Moot Hall, which is not residential. As a consequence, any noise from this area is not audible in our house and is unlikely to affect any other neighbouring properties. If I let the dog out into the garden late at night, I sometimes hear the merriment, which is testament to the assertion that any external areas would be well used and difficult to control. Stated in my letter dated 17th of June 2020, we have always tolerated minor breaches of these conditions and dealt with them amicably. During the summer months, I regularly telephoned the Fox and Hounds after 9 o'clock and when people were becoming intrusive to advise them they had drinkers on the front. Frankly, I suspect that Rob and Rani actually waited until I called before enforcing the closure, especially at the weekends, bless them. It was tedious for me, but so long as the phone was answered politely and the matter dealt with, there were no grounds for dispute. As I said before, the principal issue with drinkers in the front garden, be they older or younger, families, friends, work colleagues, you get a lot of those, is the highly unpredictable or random nature of the noise, especially laughter, shouting and banter. The only thing that can be predicted gets louder and more persistent after 9 o'clock. Having to call the pub a few times a week in the summer was clearly the actions of a reasonable neighbour. He doesn't mind a degree of flexibility. Over the years, I've noted a change in clientele at about 8 to 8:30. People or families who came out for an early evening meal or those coming for an after-work drink will tend to drift away to be replaced with customers who are intending to stay later. From observation, the busiest time in this area seems to be about 5 to 6 o'clock. It is absolutely in my interest to avoid disputes with neighbours. Not that I wish to move, but as most of us know, there is a standard question in the pre-contract inquiries relating to any arguments or disputes. This lack of dispute history would have been beneficial to Asher, and he was able to sell the business and premises to the applicant in September last year. We noted that the premises were for sale last year, and the number of prospective buyers arrived with surveyors and builders, etc. Almost anticipating this dispute, I contacted Braintree Licensing on the 26th of July 2019 to check that the licensing conditions were unaltered and they would be readily apparent to any new owner. David Malini, who I understand is present at this meeting, kindly sent me a copy of the licensing conditions. This email was appended to my letter of objection this year and clearly demonstrates that I have never stopped worrying about this matter. It must also be highlighted that when the applicant purchased the property and business in September 19, she would have been fully aware of the restrictions that have been in place for over 9 years and granted in accordance with the 2003 Licensing Act. We made the applicant welcome when she arrived and wished her and her daughter well. I really enjoyed visiting the pub at Christmas time, and during the lockdown, as Catherine has said, we joined many families in the village in purchasing takeaway food from the premises. Then, as said formally, we noticed the premises application sign on the fence in June. That any warning or prior discussion, she's seeking to remove permanently a single critical clause that allows us to remain in our home. Having spoken at length to the applicant to explain how important this restriction is to us, I am beyond disappointed that she is still seeking to remove it as soon as feasibly possible. I note reference to COVID-19 in the application, but don't accept the business argument for lifting this restriction. In May and June, the media widely expected pubs and restaurants only to allow people to sit outside when they reopened, so external seating capacity would be critical. This clearly did not happen. From observation, people, often families, order food at lunchtime or mid-afternoon in this area, but rarely after about 5. It tends to be used by people having an afternoon drink, and these people drift away or inside about 8 o'clock. This usage by quiet, respectful patrons does not really trouble us, other than having to look at the seating area itself, with brightly coloured advertising umbrellas and extremely powerful LED lights, both of which are fairly questionable in a conservation area. The Fox and Hound stopped serving food at 9, so I can only assume that people ordering evening meals must be in the dining room. I think you said you've closed the dining room, Catherine, in your earlier submission, or if they're intending to stay later. As you confirmed, there are 12 seats in the garden. I think 13 you said, although this keeps changing. But if there are more than about 10 people using this area, the social distancing aspect becomes more questionable. Therefore, unless the applicant is intending to encourage a lot of people to congregate in this area and sell them a lot of drinks after 9 o'clock, I cannot see it will make much difference to the turnover or survival of the business. Please remember this is not the only external space at the premises, with a further courtyard garden at the rear which can be used until the pub closes. It's fair to conclude, therefore, that a lot of drinks within a confined space is exactly what Mr. Shipham advised cannot be controlled. Vitally, please remember this garden is a mere 4 metres from the wall of my house, as you can see over my shoulder, with my daughter's bedroom situated directly above. There is no way that the applicant can control laughter, banter and loud voices, especially if the area is making a significant difference to the public. Finally, it is reasonable to state that 11.5-year-olds who are going to secondary school in September are more likely to be affected by disturbed sleep than babies, and significantly more susceptible to bad language or loud adult conversations. I hope that I've demonstrated I'm a considered and professional individual. When I bought this house in 2008, this garden did not exist. To be fair, most people would not appreciate a development of this nature directly outside of their windows, a development that has permanently affected our enjoyment and memories of our house. At least the conditions imposed by Braintree have made the area tolerable in the evenings and have kept the peace. With the exception of the reopening of the rear courtyard garden, I repeat that nothing has changed over the last 10 years, and there are no mitigating factors to suggest that the effects of this application on our home would be any different, especially if the numbers of people coming to the pub increase in future. To conclude, please, this application must fail. It has no credible business merits, and for it to be successful, this hearing must conclude. Mr. Shipham and the Environmental Health Department were incorrect with their advice and drafting 10 years ago. That these conditions have not actually avoided any disputes for 10 years. That Braintree District Council somehow misapplied the Licensing Act 2003, and that children living at the old bakery house no longer require the protection afforded to them by the Licensing Act, and that the amenity of the village would no longer be affected. I'm extremely grateful to you for giving me this opportunity to speak to you today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Laxton. Now, Mrs. Irwin, do you have any questions for Mr. Laxton? And please can I remind you this is just questions only.
Yes, I do. I'd like to ask Mr. Laxton, since my ownership of the pub, have there been any disturbances of the nature that's caused you so much distress 10 years ago?
No, the pub has been well managed since Mrs. Owen took over. I also note that the area is always clear by 8:30. I think there was one evening only where I happened to notice the people a few minutes later, but I would repeat that Last night, I let the dog out to do his late evening toilet, and I noticed there was a degree of laughter and merriment from the rear courtyard garden. I can only hear it when I go to the end of my garden, but that was a Monday night. So this was not causing any disturbance to me, but it's evident that people still enjoy drinking in an outside space.
Okay, I understand that. I must say, yes, there was one night when it was quite busy, and because I've had to cut back on staff because of the COVID, and I don't know if I can afford to pay any, that's why, unfortunately, I had to let quite a few go. I'm doing a lot of the work myself. And with the social distancing and everything, there was one evening where out the front, people were still there 10 minutes later. I do apologise for that. But last night, it was 2 people that were in the rear garden, and I asked them to leave at 22:12, which is 40 minutes after the last orders. Okay, so also recently, because I've been doing the pub up, as you've seen, we've had the new roof and hopefully soon new windows to replace the rotten ones. I erected the new willow fence outside the front garden, which is attached to the picket fencing. At the time, in order to offer you a little bit more privacy, I asked you if you wanted a higher fence your side in front of your window that you're sitting at now, and to offer you, to consider you as my neighbour, to ask if you wanted any more privacy. I was doing all I could to assist you, basically, for your privacy. And could you please tell me your response?
I said that I work a great deal in the dining room. I usually sit on the other side of the table, but that's my view. And you can just about see the 14th century moot hall before the front of the Fox and Hound. I mean, like most people, I like a view when I'm working. So no, I wouldn't high, particularly a high acoustic fence erected 4 meters from my window, which would have cut the natural light out. I mean, for the fence, I'm a surveyor. For the fence to have been effective in reducing noise or disturbance, it would have to be in a very substantial acoustic structure. No, I would not want that outside of my window.
Okay, that's fine. And I just want to confirm that I did comply to your wishes and I kept everything 1 meter high. I don't think I have any more questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Irwin. I'll now ask members if they have any questions for Mr. Laxton. Councillor Henson.
Yeah, I just want to explore the point, if I may, Chairman, of the where Mr. Laxton was telling his giving his I forget the word, his account when he was giving the various names of the various licensees. I appreciate the condition was there throughout, but it seemed to me that management of the premises varied according to who had it, and therefore I look at this from the point of view of, that's why I asked Mrs. Irwin where her licensing history and how she would manage, and from what I'm hearing, you seem quite happy with her her account and how she's managing the premises as a whole. But if the if the condition was to be lifted, then I appreciate your concerns, and you've lived in fear for the last 10 years. But part of me thinks that condition's been there, but that was against previous licensees. So I'd just like to get a bit more on the your feelings were the condition to change, because obviously Mrs. Irwin is a different person and she sounds reasonable, and just get your views really, please, Mr. Laxton.
Certainly, the licensee in 2010 was frankly irresponsible, but the subsequent licensees, Rob and Rani, I don't know their surnames, I'm sorry, but they will be, of course, be in the records as previous license holders, followed by Asher. They were responsible. They did have occasional live music events, but I've not mentioned these at all because this is not either the topic of conversation today or anything that gives us particular concerns. It is the random nature of law-abiding people indulging in law-abiding activities that is so difficult to live with. We have heard that there were only a few people in the rear courtyard garden last night. Mrs. Irwin asked them to leave at 20 to 12. They were only having a good time. They were not doing anything unlawful or questionable. They were having a laugh. But the trouble is, as we all know, by the time you've had a couple of drinks and you have a laugh and you're enjoying your evening, it's quite loud. It is also a fairly random noise that can't really be predicted. Someone drives past or cycles past. It seems quite appropriate to call out to them, to shout, to have a bit of banter. These things happening directly outside your front windows, anybody's front windows, is not welcome. So Mrs. Irwin is definitely a responsible licensee. That is not in question. But it is not possible, as Mr. Shipham advised me 10 years ago, to control what people say or how loudly they speak or whether or not they're allowed to laugh loudly or suddenly. It is not possible to control that noise. And this seating area is 4 meters away from my house and did not exist when I bought the house.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Schweer, do you have any questions for Mr. Laxton?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Mr. Laxton, in your representation, you made comment a couple of times about directly outside your windows. Yeah. You also then stated that there is a 4-meter distance between your house and the said premises. Could you just enlighten me, does your house with the 4-meter or the 17.5 feet gap, does that run parallel all the way down to the premises or not? And could you also let me know if you have any double glazing there or triple glazing in your household at the moment, please?
The properties are separated by a public right-of-way, a little walkway. And well, you can probably see it actually, Councillor. I'll show you again, bring it much closer, try and get it lined up. There you go. So you can just about see there's a walkway followed by a metal fence with Mrs. Irwin's new wicker fence attached behind it. We have double glazing, yes. It was the original double glazing, wooden double glazing that was installed. It's not very good, but it was.
Yes, okay, but so your house boundary is parallel all the way to that right of way, and there is a distance of 4 meter, including the garden, all the way down.
Our house bounds onto the public highway, onto the pavement, and then there is that metal fence, and then there is another meter or so to the boundary of the Boxen House.
Okay. And could I just ask, have you had at any occasion time to complain or any cause for concern to Essex County Council about the use of that footpath, people loitering or noise or?
Sorry, you seem to have broken up, Councillor. No, I haven't. Sorry, you broke up momentarily there.
Councillor Swear, we appear to be having difficulties with your
yes, I just wanted to ask if...
Sorry, Councillor, we appear to be having difficulty with your question. Could you start your question again? You may like to consider turning off your video so your connection is unfettered. Thank you.
Okay, I'll try again, Emma. Thank you. I just wanted to ask if you'd had any occasion on the actual footpath to have any cause for concerns or complaints about the use of that. Thank you.
No, none whatsoever. It is a quiet rural village. Families and dog walkers will be the predominant people that walk past. I appear to have lost connection.
No, Councillor, sorry, Mr. Laxton, you are okay. Councillor Ball, your microphone was switched off. Would you like to switch on and re-ask the question, please?
Sorry, I was going to ask whether Councillor Schwier had finished his questions or not.
Yes, I have. Thank you, Chair. Sorry.
Right, thank you very much. Okay, I was just looking at the maps there. I have a few questions of my own, Mr. Laxton. I mean, from your accounts that you've given in your original letter and that you've given today, you were subject to some quite appalling behaviour previously. I was trying to get to the bottom of what the differences were between then and now. Was the external area ever used for dining or for sitting at tables under the previous owners?
When we purchased the house, there was a single bench outside. Exactly.
That's 2006. But
beg your pardon, sir?
that was 2006, wasn't it?
2008, actually, we bought. May 2008 we moved here. There was a single bench exactly as shown on the premises license plan. That became a second bench, but people used to sit out there occasionally, used to make phone calls, used to have a cigarette, used to sit and chat, but no, it wasn't used extensively. People used to walk in and out, so effectively it was the access to the pub. Of course, as soon as the rear courtyard was closed and all the furniture was piled into this area, that of course deliberately encouraged people to come and spend the entire evening there, which frankly is exactly what this application is intended to do now. We will be encouraging people to spend the evening sitting on the front of the pub. And with the best management in the world, I do not believe that it is possible, if you're serving drinks to those people, to control laughter and general enjoyment. It is simply too close to our house, and it didn't exist previously.
Councillor Borswell, your microphone is switched off. Could you switch back on and repeat that question, please?
Sorry, I had another couple of questions for Mr. Laxton. First was your experience since the 23rd of September, I think, 2019. Received the impression that you've had any problems apart from very minor problems. Is this the case?
Yes, indeed. No, that is the case. We've had, you know, the space has been used in the afternoons. I think Mrs. Irwin will agree it can get quite busy in the afternoons. Recently, so since the pub opened on the 4th of July, you've had patrons outside there pretty much every afternoon. So from sort of lunchtime, you get a few people buying food, but a lot of the time it's used by people coming for a drink after work. There's some people who are turning up quite regularly now after work. But these people, it's busiest at about 5 to 6 o'clock in the evening, and these people will drift away. So in terms of usage, no, I haven't had any particular irritations since the pub reopened. Of course, from the time she took over, it was getting colder anyway. So very few people tend to sit out there in the winter. If they do, it's just to make quite a quick phone call or have a cigarette. But no, I mean, these long summer evenings is when people are, in fact, I noticed the application is only from May to August. Well, frankly, the area is only going to be used really from April to September, for the entire evening. But as I say, the problem here is that the nature, I think it's a fair comment, it's a sweeping statement, but it's a fair comment to say that the people who popped here for a quiet after work drink or popped out with their family in the afternoon are different to the people who turn up slightly later in the evening intending to stay until closing time. A sweeping statement, but I think it's a fair comment. And it's the it's the people who are intending to push through till closing time and buy what obviously Mrs. Irwin is intending to sell. They are the ones who are going to start to enjoy themselves on the front.
The second question was a contextual one, really. Following up Councillor Schweer's question, I was interested, construction of your house. The house was demolished, or the original building was demolished, and it was rebuilt. So I don't know why it was rebuilt in exactly the same style, possibly something to do with the Heritage Department at the county. Are you subject to restriction on what you can do with the building? And is it built of brick or timber? Is there any restriction on you regarding double glazing or altering the building in any way?
It was built very much in the same style as the old bakery house, which is why I said I found the that photograph, the black and white photograph in the pack, rather interesting. At the time, there was a courtyard round the back, a warehouse. There was a warehouse type building for the distribution of bread. I don't actually know when the bakery itself closed, but I believe it was still distributing into the 1990s. When the bakery house itself was last lived in, again, I don't have that information. But the photograph, the former old bakery house is very much in the same style as the new one. So clearly that would have been deliberate by the architects and probably, I'm assuming, approved of by Braintree planning department. In terms of restrictions, we are in a conservation area. So if I make any alterations to this house, it has to be with conservation area consent.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Wisby, I have Mrs. Irwin requesting to speak. Would it be appropriate to do this now or wait for her final statement?
Be appropriate just to state clarification from Mrs. Irwin as to what her point she'd like to make at this point. Mrs. Irwin, is it something you wish to add, or is it a question you want to ask?
No, it's just something that I wanted to say about the area at the front. That was all. I understand 100%. I do not want to encourage unsociable behaviour in my pub, and I will not stand for it. And I just wanted to say that I'm more than happy to put up a sign to say this is a quiet area. Please enjoy your drink. And with the smoking situation, if I have people in the pub and they wish to go out for a cigarette, there is a designated smoking area out in the back garden. I do not encourage or allow people to come out from the pub to smoke out the front. If they're sat out there, fair enough. I can't monitor that if they wish to have a cigarette, if they're actually based in the front garden. But there is a smoking area out the back for people who wish to just go out for a cigarette. And I'm happy to put up a sign to say this is a quiet area.
Okay. So, Mrs. Irwin, are you offering that as a further condition should the...
Well, no, I'm just saying I'm happy to work with Mr. Laxton. If
okay.
Yes, that's all.
Okay, but usually in licensing hearings, when somebody says we are happy to do something, we do need to clarify whether you are proposing that as to be a proposed condition, or it's just something that you are wanting to do under a working relationship? Because
Yes.
obviously if you're offering it as a condition, then that's something that members may consider in the determination of your application.
I apologise. I've never done anything like this before in
That's
my life.
fine.
So it's all pretty new. But no, it's just to work with Mr. Laxton. It's
Okay.
not the condition.
Thank you very much for that clarification. Thank you, Chairman. If I may hand back to you.
Thank you, members. We will now proceed to the closing statements. Can I invite Mr. Laxton to make his closing statement? And this is just so that you can summarise any points that you wish to make, briefly, and comment on the replies given in response to questions. But again, you can't introduce new matters. Thank you.
I think as you'll agree, my submission was fairly thorough. I mean, the conclusion, as I said before, is that these conditions were very carefully thought through. They were designed to keep the peace between the two properties. It is regrettable that these two properties are so close together, but we are where we are, as the old cliche goes. And this garden area was a new development. So this, obviously, garden area did not exist when planning permission was granted for my house 19 years ago now, isn't it? All I will say is that it is, I appreciate that Mrs. Irwin is trying to run a responsible premises, but it is not actually possible to control how loudly people speak or sudden bursts of laughter if people are enjoying themselves, frankly. And I can only defer to Mr. Shipham's advice at the time that you cannot control it. A licensing authority, a licensee, a neighbour cannot control what people say or how loudly they speak. So really the only way that we can get peace at night for the protection of our children is for this area to be closed after 8:30.
Councillor Bohr, sorry, your microphone is switched off, please.
Sorry. I'll now invite, thank you, Mr. Laxton. I will now invite Mrs. Irwin to make a closing statement. Mrs. Irwin, you may also summarise any points you wish to make and comment on the replies given in response to questions, but you may not introduce new matters. Go ahead.
Okay, so when I made the application, I would like this area to use for 4 months of the year only, as mentioned previously, from May, June, July, August, May through to August. This will hopefully help to keep the business and the pub alive. The extra room, the extra time for people to enjoy food. It is a very difficult time at the moment for the hospitality sector, as well as every other business that's out there at the moment. This pub has been here for 330 years plus, and I, being the owner of this beautiful building, I certainly wouldn't want to see it go anywhere and have to close down due to not having enough space at all. I would just like to say that I'm quite a professional businesswoman. I've owned many businesses. I own an operator's license. So I've had businesses where I've had to follow the rules. I don't believe in bending rules. Rules are there to be created for a reason. And I have had plenty of people management. So I feel more than confident that I can run this pub to the best of my ability, keeping everybody happy, including Mr. Laxton, the whole of the village, providing a service. And I don't think, in my opinion, there's anything to worry about, because I will not tolerate bad behaviour from anybody. And obviously part of my job is to make sure that they don't drink too much. And that's when it's quite a a complicated job to be a landlady, but it's one that I thoroughly enjoy. Out of all the businesses I've owned, from cafes, newsagents, transport businesses, construction companies, all the health and safety regarded with that had to be implied, then I feel that I am more than capable of doing this to the best of my ability for everybody's benefit. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll now ask Emma Wisby, our legal advisor, if there are any matters which require clarification or advice before we adjourn for deliberation. Mrs. Wisby.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, you have had a very thorough history of the premises from Mr. Laxton regarding the previous premises licence holders at this premises. However, Chairman, what you are looking at is the current applicant before you. Mr. Laxton has set out a history which has been put in place to demonstrate the need for the continuation of the condition 10 on the premises licence. Members, when determining your application, you are required to have regard to the council's own statement licensing policy, but you also have regard to the statutory guidance issued under the Licensing Act. And in particular, I would draw your attention to paragraphs 8.57, where you are to look at the likely effect of the grant of the variation on the promotion of the 4 licensing objectives. Now, with this particular matter, the 2 objectives which are engaged are set out in Mr. Laxton's letter, which is the prevention of public nuisance and harm to children. If I just may touch upon the harm to children, there is no special category of nuisance under that licensing objectives. The experience that children may have caused by the noise nuisance is actually dealt with under the wider public harm licensing objective. The protection of children from harm is a licensing objective which is more to do with the activities on the premises, not a flow of activities from the premises. I'm also minded to direct you to paragraph 944 of the statutory guidance, which reminds members that variations, you should look at the wider issues such as other conditions already in place to mitigate the potential negative impact of the variation. Chairman and members, I'm obliged to point out to you, as part of the application process, Mrs. Irwin is obliged to set out steps which she is minded that she will take should this application to vary be granted. Those are set out on pages 14 and 15 of your reports. So if this application is granted, the steps which are set out in boxes A through to E would be conditions imposed upon the licence, which are to deal with the management of the premises should the variation be granted. Members, you are only looking at the variation of these premises licence to remove condition 10. You are not looking at the history of the premises. You are not here to determine any concerns regarding the external area. The external area has been subject to a premises licence since 2010. There is no responsible authority representation by environmental health, so therefore they must be satisfied that they have no issues to raise under this application. However, Mr. Laxton has correctly pointed out the engagement he has had previously, and that the condition did come by way of negotiations on a much, much earlier application in 2010 where it was considered appropriate. However, Chairman, I would advise you that that condition was not subject to a hearing, so therefore it was not tested, it was agreed. So therefore it is a uncontested condition in terms of whether it was appropriate to implement on the licence in order to promote the 4 licence objectives. However, that condition has been in place for 10 years, and it is Mr. Laxton's argument that that condition has ensured that the disturbance from the premises for the nuisance external area has not impacted upon his family and the occupation of his property. We have touched briefly upon planning matters. Members, as you are aware, you cannot determine this matter on matters which are for the planning authority. there has been reference to the premises being in a conservation area. This premises is already subject to a premises license, so therefore the conservation area is not something you have to have regard to. It currently has a license. This is not a review, so you are not looking at the full operation of the premises in looking at the determination of this application before you today. Chairman, I will retire with you in your deliberation, and should there be a need to give further advice before you announce your decision, I will do that at Friday's hearing. Chairman, there is nothing further to add unless members have any particular questions they wish to direct at me at this point, and therefore I hand the matter back to you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mrs. Wisby. We all obviously have different clocks and watches, but by mine at 11:42, I will now adjourn this hearing of the licensing subcommittee for deliberation until 10 a.m. on Friday, the 24th of July, 2020. Thank you very much. I'll now hand over to Emma Wisby to close the meeting and end the public broadcast. Thank you very much for attending.
Thank you, Chairman. Please can I ask the webcasting officer to stop the broadcast